I always wondered what it felt like to be the golden child, the one showered with praise, effortlessly adored, the one whose name lit up a room just by existing. Some people are born into that role, their lives a constant stream of admiration and applause. But I wasn't one of them. In my family, I wasn't the bright star or the pride of my parents. I was the shadow lingering at the edges, always there but never truly seen. It didn't matter how hard I tried. In their eyes, I was an afterthought, a disappointment. Meanwhile, my brother Henry basked in the warmth of their love, their admiration, their endless, unwavering belief in his greatness. It didn't matter that his achievements were often exaggerated, that his confidence was little more than bravado. He was their champion, and I was nothing. We grew up in a small town in Ohio, the kind of place where people knew your entire life story before you even had a chance to live it. Reputation was everything. Once you were labeled, that label stuck. Henry was the golden boy, the athlete, the prodigy. I was the quiet one, the one with no real future, the girl who spent too much time with her nose in books instead of joining the real world. My father, Richard, was a man of few words and even fewer emotions. He worked tirelessly, waking before dawn and returning home long after dark, never complaining, but never showing warmth either. He was like a ghost in our house, only truly visible when something displeased him. And my mother, Eleanor, she was different. She was present, but in a way that felt more like an obligation than genuine care. She had been raised with strict traditional values, and in her mind, a successful child was one who fit her idea of success. Strong, ambitious, family-oriented. Henry checked every box, and I was a smudge on the picture she had painted of her perfect family. By the time we reached adulthood, Henry's success was the centerpiece of every conversation. He worked at a local car dealership, selling dreams in the form of shiny new vehicles. To our parents, this was enough to make him a role model. He had the house with the neatly trimmed lawn, the wife who played the role of devoted spouse, and the two sons who were already following in his footsteps. His life was a checklist of accomplishments that made our family proud. And me? I was an afterthought. They never bothered to ask about my life, assuming that I was still drifting aimlessly, clinging to a future that would never materialize. Even when I managed to save enough to attend college, my decision to drop out after 2 years only cemented their belief that I was a failure. But they never saw the full story. They didn't see the nights I spent studying, exhausted from my part-time job at the comic book store. They didn't see how much I fought to carve out a path that felt right for me. And they certainly didn't see the moment when I realized that college wasn't the right fit, that I needed something different. To them, dropping out was an admission of defeat, a confirmation of my inadequacy. But for me, it was a beginning. My younger sister, Olivia, had always been somewhat of a mystery to me. She married young, settling into the role of wife and mother without hesitation. We had never been particularly close, and when we reconnected later in life, I realized that she had absorbed our parents' values completely. It wasn't malice that made her treat me as an outsider. It was simply a way to maintain her place in the family hierarchy. To be on Henry's side was to be on the winning team, and in their world, there was no room for a tie. Sunday dinners were the worst. 2 hours of driving, only to sit at a table where I barely existed. The conversation revolved around Henry, his latest promotion, his new car, his son's achievements. If I dared to mention my own life, the topic would quickly shift, as if my words had never been spoken. They still thought I worked at that comic book store, unaware that it had closed a decade ago, and Henry, always the performer, would place a condescending hand on my shoulder and offer his signature advice. "Melia, you really need to have a plan for the future. You can't just keep drifting like this." I would smirk, biting back the truth. Because if they knew, if they had any idea of what I had actually built, they wouldn't know how to react. I had long since stopped seeking their approval, but part of me still wondered, What would happen if they finally saw me for who I really was? Growing up, I had learned one painful lesson. When your worth is measured against someone else's success, you will never be enough. No matter how hard I tried, I could never be Henry. I had asthma as a child, which meant sports were out of the question. I hated gym class, hated the way my lungs burned during long runs, hated the laughter of the other kids when they saw me struggle for air. My mother would watch me with a sigh, shaking her head as if my weakness was a personal affront. "Amelia, you need to be stronger," she'd say, as if sheer willpower could override my body's limitations. Strong. That was the word they loved to use. But strength, in their eyes, wasn't about resilience or endurance. It was about fitting into their narrow definition of success. Henry was strong because he played football, because he won medals, because he made our father proud. And me? I was the girl who sat in the library, lost in a world of stories they thought were meaningless. After high school, I tried to do what was expected of me. I enrolled in college, balancing my studies with a job at the comic book store. It was the closest thing to happiness I had found, a place where I belonged, where I met people who shared my interests. But to my family, it was a joke. "Do you really want to spend your whole life selling kids' stuff?" my mother asked one evening, watching me tie my work apron. I didn't answer. There was no point. 2 years into college, I dropped out. The classes felt empty, the expectations suffocating. But to my family, this was confirmation of my failure. My father's disappointment was as cold as ever. "Henry has had a stable job for years. Why can't you learn from him?" That was all he said. But in that moment, I understood. I would never be enough for them. They never asked why I left college, never cared about what I truly wanted. They had written me off, a failure, a disappointment, a shadow. But what they didn't know, what they never even thought to consider, was that this was the moment my real life began. After leaving college, I continued working at the comic book store, but not just to get by. I met someone, a friend who shared my passion for technology. Together, we started a small IT company, pouring everything we had into it. The early days were brutal. There were months where we barely made enough to survive, where we questioned if we had made the right choice. But we kept pushing. And then, things changed. Our company grew faster than we could have imagined. We landed major contracts, expanded our team, and within a few years, our small startup had become something real, something valuable. When we sold the company to a larger corporation, I walked away with more money than my family could ever dream of. I could have flaunted it. I could have bought a mansion, a sports car, something flashy to force them to see me, but I didn't need to. I bought a modest home, a car I loved, not because it was impressive, but because it felt like me. My success wasn't about proving anything to them. It was about proving something to myself. And they had no idea. But the truth had a way of revealing itself. And soon my family would learn exactly who I had become. And I couldn't wait to see their faces when they did. Henry had always carried himself like he was untouchable, like the world bent in his favor simply because he willed it to. He walked into a room with the kind of confidence that only came from years of being told he was special, that he was the best, that he could do no wrong. It wasn't arrogance, not entirely. It was something deeper, something ingrained in him by the endless praise our parents showered upon him. And for the longest time, I thought that confidence was unshakable. I thought he truly believed in his own perfection. But I was wrong, because beneath all of it, the bravado, the boasting, the carefully curated image, Henry was terrified. He had spent his entire life clinging to the idea that he was better than me, that he was the successful one, the capable one, the son my parents could rely on. But the moment he realized that I had surpassed him, that the sister he had spent decades dismissing had built something far greater than he ever had, he broke. Not in a way that was immediately obvious. Henry didn't scream, didn't lash out in anger, Not at first, but something in his eyes shifted when he learned the truth, the first crack in his perfect image. And once that crack formed, the whole facade started to crumble. I wasn't supposed to be successful. That wasn't the story my family had written for me. I was supposed to struggle, to drift, to always be the one who needed help. I was supposed to be the failure, the cautionary tale that made Henry shine even brighter by comparison. But reality had a funny way of rewriting expectations. The private investigator he hired to dig into my life had uncovered the truth. My assets, my company, the wealth I had quietly accumulated over the years. It was information Henry never expected to find, and once he had it, he didn't know what to do with it. The night my parents found out was a turning point. My mother had sat in stunned silence, her hands shaking slightly as she processed the numbers in front of her. My father, always so composed, had shifted uncomfortably in his seat, and Henry, he had tried to act unfazed, but I could see the tension in his jaw, the way his fingers curled into his palms like he was holding back something explosive. "Melia," my mother had finally said, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Why didn't you ever tell us?" I had shrugged, keeping my voice even. "Did you ever ask?" It was a simple question, but it cut deeper than any argument ever could. Because the truth was, they never had. They had never cared enough to check in, never thought to ask about my life beyond what fit their preconceived notions of me. And now that they knew, now that they saw me as someone worth acknowledging, they didn't know how to handle it. But Henry, he wasn't ready to let go of his throne just yet. At the next family gathering, he was desperate to reclaim his position, to remind everyone that he was still the golden child, the successful one. He puffed out his chest and forced a grin, launching into a speech about his latest sales achievement at the dealership, about how he was planning to invest in real estate, about how financial stability was the key to a fulfilling life. No one interrupted him. Not because they were interested, but because, for the first time, the room wasn't hanging on to his every word. My mother wasn't nodding enthusiastically. My father wasn't giving his usual approving nods. Olivia wasn't chiming in with her usual praise. The dynamic had shifted, and Henry could feel it. He was losing control, so he doubled down. "My house was recently appraised higher than I expected," he said, leaning back in his chair, flashing the same smug grin he always did when he wanted to assert dominance. "I might even start buying properties. Real estate's the future, you know." I met his gaze, calm and unbothered. "Are you sure about that, Henry?" His grin faltered slightly. "What's that supposed to mean?" I tilted my head, watching him carefully. "Because, from what I know, you have 3 unpaid mortgages, outstanding tax debt with the IRS, and a credit score that's, well, let's just say it's not great." The silence that followed was suffocating. My mother's fork clattered against her plate. My father's expression darkened, his jaw tightening. Olivia stared at Henry, wide-eyed, as if seeing him for the first time. Henry's face turned red, his fists clenching at his sides. "Shut up, Amelia." I arched a brow. "Why? Because you don't like the truth?" He shot up from his chair so fast it nearly tipped over. "You've always been jealous of me," he snapped. "You've spent your whole life trying to tear me down because you can't stand the fact that I'm better than you." I laughed, a short, sharp sound that cut through the tension like a knife. "Jealous?" I shook my head. "Henry, there's nothing about you that I would ever envy." And that was the moment he cracked. All the years of control, all the effort he had put into maintaining his perfect image, it all shattered in an instant. He turned to our parents, his voice rising in desperation. "Why is it that the second Amelia has money, suddenly she's the favorite? I did everything right. I followed the rules. I got married. I built a life that should have made you proud. And now suddenly, she's the one you're all fawning over?" No one spoke. Not my mother, not my father, not Olivia, because there was nothing left to say. Henry had always been the favored son. He had always been the one they admired, the one they protected, the one they placed above all else. And yet, in that moment, he felt abandoned, forgotten. And for the first time in his life, he understood what it felt like to be me. I didn't stay long after that. I left while the house was still thick with tension, while my mother's hands were still trembling, while Henry's breath was still coming in ragged, furious bursts. I drove home in silence, my fingers gripping the steering wheel a little too tightly. I should have felt victorious. I should have felt satisfied. But instead, I felt empty. Because deep down, I had never wanted to destroy Henry. I had never wanted to see my family crumble under the weight of their own expectations. I had just wanted to be seen. The next morning, I woke up to a message from my mother. It was short. "You're overreacting, Amelia. Family should come first." I stared at the screen for a long time before finally setting my phone down. No response, no justification, no attempt to explain myself. I didn't need to, because for the first time in my life, I wasn't looking for their approval. I wasn't waiting for them to accept me, to love me the way I had always wished they would. I was free, and that was all that mattered. The days after that dinner were eerily quiet. No calls, no texts, no attempts to pretend like everything was fine. My parents, for all their obsession with family, didn't know how to react when their perfect son cracked under the weight of his own deception. And Henry, I imagined he was still reeling, still trying to figure out how he had let himself lose control so completely. For the first time in his life, he wasn't in the spotlight. He wasn't the one everyone admired. He wasn't the one holding all the power. It was strange. I had spent my entire life feeling like an outsider, convinced that no matter what I did, I would always be the one left behind. And yet, now that I had stepped into my own, now that I had proved that I wasn't the failure they had always assumed I was, I felt nothing. No triumph, no vindication, just an overwhelming sense of exhaustion, like I had spent years fighting a battle that was never worth it to begin with. A week passed before Olivia reached out. It was unexpected. She had never been one to take my side, never been the kind of sister to push back against the family dynamic. But something had shifted that night, and I could hear it in her voice when she finally called. "Hey," she said, hesitant, "I just wanted to check in." I almost laughed. "Since when do you check in on me?" She let out a small sigh. "I don't know. I guess I never really thought about how unfair it was, the way they treated you. I don't know if I ignored it or if I convinced myself it wasn't that bad, but that night, I don't know. It was different." I leaned back against my couch, staring up at the ceiling. "They're never going to change, Olivia." She was quiet for a long moment. "Maybe not, but I guess I just wanted to say that I see it now. And I'm sorry." I closed my eyes, exhaling slowly. Sorry, it was such a simple word, but it carried a weight I hadn't realized I needed to hear. "It's okay," I said, and for the first time, I meant it. I didn't expect Olivia to suddenly become my ally. I didn't expect her to turn against our parents or to completely rewrite the way she saw our family. But for the first time in my life, I didn't feel completely alone in it. That was enough. Henry, on the other hand, was a different story. 2 weeks after that disastrous dinner, I got an email from a lawyer. At first, I thought it was some kind of mistake. But as I read through the document, the truth became clear. Henry was trying to sue me. It was absurd. His case was weak at best, an attempt to claim that I had defamed him in front of our parents, that I had somehow caused irreparable damage to his reputation. It was laughable, really, but it wasn't about winning. It was about control. Henry had lost his grip on the narrative, and he was desperate to get it back. I forwarded the email to my own lawyer without a second thought. The lawsuit had no foundation, and we both knew it wouldn't hold up in court. But that wasn't the point. Henry wasn't trying to win. He was trying to intimidate me, to make me second-guess myself, to remind me that he wasn't going to let go of his throne without a fight. I refused to give him the satisfaction. A few days later, I sent him a short email in return. "Henry, I hope you understand that this is a waste of everyone's time. If you want to talk, we can talk. But if you go through with this, you're only going to embarrass yourself further. Amelia." He never responded. A week later, his lawyer withdrew the case. It should have felt like a victory, but instead, it just reinforced what I had already known. Henry wasn't going to change. He would fight, he would deny, he would cling to his pride with everything he had. But at the end of the day, he had already lost. And I wasn't going to waste another second of my life trying to fix something that had been broken from the start. Instead, I focused on moving forward. Luca had been right when he told me that I didn't have to cut my family off completely. I just had to set boundaries. So I did. I stopped going to Sunday dinners, stopped answering my mother's guilt-tripping texts. I let them come to me, and when they did, I kept my distance. I met my mother for coffee instead of going to her house, kept conversations short and neutral. My father, as expected, remained distant, offering little more than a few stiff nods whenever we did see each other. Henry, predictably, cut me off completely, and for the first time in my life, I didn't care. Because I had built something for myself, something real, something stable, something that wasn't dependent on their approval. My business was thriving, my friendships were strong, and Luca was becoming something I hadn't realized I wanted. We had met by chance at that cybersecurity conference, but he had quickly become a steady presence in my life. He wasn't just someone who listened, he was someone who understood, and more importantly, he was someone who didn't expect me to be anything other than exactly who I was. One night, as we sat on his balcony, a warm breeze rolling through the city, he turned to me with that quiet intensity of his. "Have you ever thought about leaving Ohio?" he asked. I blinked, caught off guard. "Leaving?" He nodded. "You built your company from nothing. You could work from anywhere. Why stay in a place that holds so much history?" I stared down at my glass of wine, thinking. I had spent so much of my life fighting to prove myself, to carve out a space where I could be seen. But now that I had it, now that I had finally freed myself from their expectations, I realized I didn't need to stay. I didn't need to be the girl who kept showing up just to prove a point. I had already won. "I don't know," I admitted. "I guess I never thought about it." He smiled, taking a slow sip of his drink. "Well, maybe it's time to start." And for the first time, I let myself imagine it. A life beyond Ohio. A life where I wasn't the forgotten sister or the failure trying to prove her worth. A life where I was just me. A few weeks later, I made my decision. I packed up my things, sold my house, and left. Not in anger, not in some dramatic declaration of freedom, just in quiet, undeniable certainty that this was the right move. My parents barely reacted. Olivia wished me luck. Henry, of course, said nothing. But it didn't matter. Because I wasn't running away. I was simply moving forward. A year later, I was sitting on a beach in California, my laptop open, the sun warm against my skin, when I got a text from Olivia. "Mom keeps asking about you. She won't admit it, but I think she actually misses you." I smiled, typing out a quick response. "I hope she's doing well. Tell her I said hi. No anger, no bitterness, just peace." Because for the first time in my life, I was exactly where I was meant to be, and that was more than enough.